Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Flash Forward, the show where I talk about everything Flash related, from the comics to possibly even the TV show in the future. Who knows? But right now, we're dealing with reading every single issue of the Flash, talking about all the spin offs, which is exactly what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about Flash Green Lantern Brave and the Bold, a mini-series written by Mark Waid and Tom Peyer that came out in 1999. So, came out around the time that Waid was finishing up on his Flash run. Um, and yeah, so I actually was able to contact Mark Waid and actually ask him a few questions about this mini-series and how it came about, which was pretty great. I just DM'd him and he was happy to answer some questions, and yeah, so I learned from him that the mini series came about because he had written JLA Year One, which was a mini series all about the very first year of the JLA and their origins. It was like a new retconned origin, and I'm pretty sure it's stayed canon since because it was very popular. And because it was so popular, DC asked Waid if he wanted to do something like a sequel or something else, and Waid didn't want to do JLA Year 2. He wanted to do something different, so he pitched this instead. So what this is, what Green Lantern and Flash Brave and the Bold is it's kind of like it's not Green Lantern and Flash Year One, but it's kind of like a history of Green Lantern and Flash throughout like the 70s, I think like the late 60s, 70s, um early 80s, like it's pretty much all the way up until Infinite Crisis, bits and pieces taken from that era, to create kind of a timeline for this mini series. Waid actually said that he and Tom looked up all of the original Flash and Green Lantern team ups because they had quite a few back in the Silver and Bronze Age, and then kind of like picked out of those and tried to construct a timeline based on those because they were all at different points in time in the comics. So they were able to look back at those, create a timeline, and then create the miniseries out of that. So this series is kind of like episodic, where each issue deals with a different adventure that also takes place at a different point in time. And something else that Waid said was that one of the goals of this series was to show a juxtaposition between Hal and Barry's development over those years, and that Hal is a constantly changing character. His life is changing in many different ways, affecting him, usually in bad ways. Meanwhile, Barry kind of has the perfect life, and he doesn't really go through any real changes until the final issue of this miniseries. And like it wasn't until towards the end of Barry's time as the Flash before he died that he really met any kind of actual difficulty in his life, and Waid and Peyer wanted to explore that and how Hal and Barry bounce off of one another, especially with Hal spending so much time with somebody whose life is so different to his, who doesn't have the same problems, who like and maybe there's like jealousy involved with that, of Hal being jealous of Barry because Barry doesn't have those kind of problems in his life and kind of just got to have the perfect life for so many years. So it was interesting learning about that, learning that was the motivation behind the series and the goal of the story. I also asked him like, was this series ever intended to go on longer than 6 issues? Like, was it ever a possibility that DC was going to extend it if the sales were good? And he said no. Like, he said that it was always intended to be 6 issues, and that it was there was never a chance for it to be expanded from then. He also said that because I asked him, if it had been expanded, like if they had extended it, are there any stories or eras of the Flash and Green Lantern that he would have wanted to explore? And he said that honestly, this series explores absolutely everything that he wanted to. So he didn't really need. He doesn't really have the feeling of wanting to explore any more Flash and Green Lantern or any other eras, and he's also said that because I asked him if there are any other like duos, like any other superhero duos that he'd love to do a book like that, because obviously he's doing World's Finest at the moment, which is Batman and Superman. I asked him if there's any other ones that he has his eyes on or wants to do, like a miniseries or a limited series, or and he said that he'd love to do any of the Silver Age characters. So I'm assuming like Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, Aquaman, like any of those. Like he'd love to do a duo of those characters. But right now, World's Finest is scratching the itch that he's been having for these kind of stories. So who knows? When World's Finest ends, which it probably will someday, you can count on the fact that Waid will probably try and move on to some other characters, and I'm sure you'll see him write more series like this in the future because he still is interested in writing stuff like this. So yeah, with that out of the way, I think it's time we jumped straight into the series and covered Brave and the Bold. So before we do that, if you're not subscribed, then please subscribe and like the video and hit the notification bell so that you know when videos are going to come out in the future. So, starting off with issue 1, Those Who Worship Evil's Might. The art throughout this series is done by Perry Kitson, and it's pretty incredible art. I think he does a great job of capitulating, like, each era that is within this series. Like at the start, it's kind of like supposed to be like 60s kind of art, and then as it goes on, it becomes more inspired by the 70s and the 80s. So this first issue takes place at around the time that Barry and Hal have first met each other, which is on the Justice League. It actually starts off with giving us a little bit of an overview of their origins, which is Barry getting struck by lightning and doused in chemicals, and Hal Jordan ending up in a plane crash where he finds Abin Sur, and Abin Sur passes on the ring to him. And then we move on to a plane flying through America, I guess. And it's currently been hijacked by this guy who wants them to radio the tower to get him $1 million. And he's actually holding the pilot hostage, and all of a sudden he gets hit by this strange beam and completely changes his personality. He goes from being aggressive, threatening to shoot people, to being incredibly afraid and apologizing for what he's done. And that's when his shadow from behind emerges from the wall, grabs his gun, and forces him to shoot himself in the back. And so Hal Jordan is visiting the airport because he's waiting for Barry to arrive, because he offered Barry to hang out. Like, he asked him if he wanted to hang out, but because Barry is Barry, he's incredibly late, and Hal basically is about to give up. He decides to call Barry, and it turns out Barry got caught up at work signing documents and stuff, and Hal is just like, whatever, you said you were going to hang out, so come here. And he uses his ring to just teleport Barry to the airport, and he's like, we're going to a party. And Barry's like, I can't go to a party dressed in my lab coat. And Hal's just like, who cares? Who cares how you dress? Like, just come to the party, it'll be fine. And Barry's like, no, I can't. and he quickly like runs off and puts on his clothes, and then he buys a plane ticket, and Hal is like, why did you even bother buying a plane ticket? And Barry's like, well, because I'm trying to keep my two lives separate, the Flash and Barry. We get a little bit of like the dynamic between Hal and Barry in this, where Barry is obviously the textbook geek, and Hal is kind of like more of a laid back kind of guy. Like he doesn't have any money to pay for a car parking ticket, so Barry lends him the money, and Hal's like, I'll pay you back, and Barry's like, don't worry about it. So it's almost kind of like Hal's known for, being lent money and not really paying it back, just going off of Barry's reaction to it. So they head to the party where Hal's kind of mingling with all the ladies at the party, and he realizes that Barry is sitting by himself. So he invites Barry to come and talk to the women and stuff, and Barry's like, I'd love to, but, I don't know how my girlfriend would feel about that, because he's seeing Iris at the moment. And Hal's just like, you don't have to talk to any of the women in that way. I just think you should mingle a little bit more. There's my friend Pieface and his girlfriend. And look, there's Carol Ferris, the host of the party. And so they find Carol, and she's currently talking to a character known as Dirk Boostrom, who is Hal's rival, who I'm pretty sure was in those old comics back in the day, like in the Silver Age and stuff. Like, Dirk Boostrom was a character, and he's also the pilot of the plane that we saw at the beginning of the story. So while he's talking to Carol, and he's talking about how he was being held hostage and stuff on the plane and how brave he was, his shadow then appears from behind him, and all of a sudden he starts admitting that he wasn't brave and that he was actually a little baby and was crying and wet his pants and stuff. And the shadow grabs him from behind and tries to choke him out, and Carol screams for help, and so Barry and Hal quickly get changed into their Flash and Green Lantern costumes and decide to take on the Shadow. The Shadow has actually absorbed Dirk into him. So, or like left him unconscious. Yeah, no, not, it hasn't absorbed him, but it's left Dirk unconscious. And so Hal and Barry are able to fight the Shadow in order to save Dirk's life. Carol gets shoved out of a nearby window, so Barry has to quickly grab her. And when Hal uses his lantern ring against the Shadow, he sees that there's something on the other, like within it, that might have been responsible for creating the Shadow. So he just flies straight into the Shadow, and Barry chases after him, and they end up on another planet. And on this planet, they see some kind of building in the distance, so they decide to go over to the building, and as they're about to go to it, Hal is like, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should kind of figure out exactly where we are first before we go straight over there. And that's when a pink beam comes and shoots at them and traps Barry and Hal in a pink force field, which then brings them to the, alien-like tower, where they meet the one responsible for creating the Shadows. He refers to himself as Science Minister Saran, and basically he describes the Shadows as a virus that he created that started with the man on the plane, and it is to create evil, like, basically it draws out the evil side, creating the Shadow. And the reason why he wants to create these evil Shadows is because his empire is being attacked by the Khund, and so he wants an army of evil Shadow people to fight against the Khund Empire. And Hal was like, yeah, but why do you need to, like, kill these people? And Sarar explains that in order for the Shadows to get rid of their host, they need to kill their host. So that's why the shadows are trying to kill, and that's why they're also so evil, and it's also why the people suddenly their personality changes. It's because all the evil is drawn out of them and into the shadow. So Hal and Barry try to escape from the force field, but Barry comes to the conclusion that the force field doesn't have, like, the molecules aren't structural. So Hal uses his Green Lantern ring to make the molecules a specific structure, so of the force field, a specific structure, so that Barry can vibrate through them and break the force field, which he does. They break out and they destroy Sarah's stuff, like all of his technology, and then they head straight through the shadow portal that they use to enter this world, where they manage to destroy the shadow with Hal Jordan's lantern powers. And luckily, Dirk was saved. Like, he's still alive. They managed to save Dirk's life. And then they realized that everyone that was on the plane was probably affected by the virus that Sarah was talking about. So Barry and Hal have to track down everyone that was on the plane. Hal has to actually go and charge his ring, so he goes and does that. And while he charges his ring, Barry goes to the airport where he finds out all the names of everyone that was on the plane, and then they travel throughout the entire city, finding everybody, destroying their shadows. And so Barry and Hal are like, well, that's all good. Like, we've destroyed all the shadows. That should be the end of it, right? Nope. It turns out that Barry and Hal were also infected by the virus, and so their shadows have drawn all the evil out of them and have begun trying to kill them. And because it sucked out all of their evil, the only evil part of Barry and Hal is the will to want to fight something. So they can't, even though they really want to, they can't fight their own shadow selves. So what they do instead is they kind of realize the shadow versions of themselves aren't working together very well. So Hal traps them in a force field made out of his lantern energy, and he makes it so that the molecules of the force field, like, can't be broken out of. And because the shadows aren't working together, they can't, like, he makes it so that the molecules of the force field are unstable, so that the shadow Barry Allen can't vibrate out of them. And because they're not working together, the shadows can't break out of the force field, because Barry and Hal had to work together in order to break out. So Hal is able to just crush them in the force field and destroy them. And by destroying the two shadows in the force field, it replenishes, like, it turns their shadows back to normal. And Hal tests it out by creating a little shadow bunny in a nearby rock, and that's how they confirm that the shadows are under their full control again. So the shadows have been destroyed, and in order to stop Sarah from ever creating more evil shadows, Hal contacts the Guardians and tells them to keep an eye on Sarah. And so we get a little bit of a, like, after Barry and Hal go their separate ways, Hal immediately contacts the Guardians, which is something that he can't tell Barry. He just tells Barry that he's got some documents to sign, but because he's not allowed to tell Barry that he can talk to the Guardians directly. It's supposed to be a little bit of a Green Lantern secret. And then it ends with Barry and Hal talking to Iris and Pieface about hanging out with each other, and both Iris and Pieface are surprised that the two of them are so interested in hanging out with one another. They're basically just like, what made you pick one another to try and become friends? Like, what draw you to each other? And Barry and Hal are just kind of like, I don't know. Honestly, like, we don't know. And so that's where the issue ends. Right off the bat, just a pretty great intro to Barry and Hal's relationship, and like, I didn't know what to expect when it came to the stories within this, but right off the bat, we're getting pretty imaginative with it. It's very much like the 60s, like, kind of stories where we were doing things like shadow monsters and like kind of weird ideas that were really cool based around alien and science technology. So yeah, the next issue, which is issue two, um, is a team up story involving Mirror Master and Black Hand, two villains from years, like two classic villains of the Flash and Green Lantern. Black Hand would eventually actually become like a huge villain in the future. If you know Blackest Night, then you know. Um, but it doesn't just this story doesn't just involve them. It also involves Wally West, aka the Kid Flash, as well. So we'll get to see him show up in the story too. So, issue 2 begins with our setting of where this issue takes place. Barry Allen and Iris are now married, so it takes place like in the 70s, I'd say. Hal is no longer a test pilot, he is now an insurance agent because Hal kind of bounces around quite a few different jobs. He's a test pilot at one point. At one point, he is a flight instructor. Then he became a insurance person, and then an insurance agent or insurance salesman, and then eventually he would become a toy like seller, like a toy inventor or like a toy seller. Which I'm curious if that gets brought up later in this. So he's out to dinner with his new girlfriend Eve, who is kind of like snobby, stuck up, woman who, grew up on a silver spoon. And they're supposed to be on a date with, like, they're supposed to be going out to dinner with Barry and Iris, and Wally is here too. Hal doesn't know that Wally is Kid Flash yet. Wally doesn't know that Hal is Green Lantern. So they're supposed to be having dinner later, but before they're having dinner, they've gone to get like milkshakes, and Barry is late as usual. But eventually he shows up, and when he shows up, he tells Hal that he needs to talk to him about something after they've finished, eating. And Barry offers to pay the bill, and Hal says that he's going to pay it because he never bought Barry and Iris a gift for their wedding. And then he looks at the bill, and his face just drops. And then he looks at Barry, and Barry just rolls his eyes and agrees to pay for the bill. And Hal's just like, I promise, like, I'll pay you back, all right? And that's when that's when Barry takes Hal aside to tell him what he needed to say, which was that there's a couple of problems currently going on, and that the three of them might have to deal with it. And Hal's like, the three of us? And Barry's like, yeah, Wally's gonna come too. Obviously Iris and Eve don't know that Hal and Barry are Green Lantern and the Flash, so they basically just tell Eve and Iris that they're gonna take Wally, back home, and then they'll come and see them for dinner, and later they'll meet with them later. And so that's kind of their excuse to get away from the girls, so that they can head to a nearby alleyway and get into their costumes, which is when Wally discovers that Hal is Green Lantern, and that Hal discovers Wally is Kid Flash. So basically what's happened is a nearby bank has been broken into by someone who has used Green Lantern's lantern energy, and it turns out that that person is Black Hand, because Black Hand has this device where he can steal people's powers. So he stole like Green Lantern's energy, and he was able to use it. Green Lantern thought that the device had run out of power, but it turns out that Black Hand is working with Mirror Master, and Mirror Master was able to repower Black Hand's device, allowing him to continue using the lantern energy. Wally tries to attack Black Hand and Mirror Master, but Black Hand goes to shoot his device at Barry and Hal to steal all of their powers, but Wally runs in the way, and it steals Wally's speed instead. And so Black Hand and Mirror Master get away, and Barry and Hal try to chase after them, and so does Wally. but Wally can't run at super speed anymore because his powers have been taken from him. So Barry originally is like, all right, that means you're not going to be able to come with us. You're going to have to stay behind. But Hal is like, or maybe he doesn't. And he lends Wally some of his lantern energy and transforms Wally into the Kid Lantern. And he promises, so like, yeah, Wally gets like his own lantern suit and he becomes Kid Lantern. And he promises Barry that this is just going to be for one night and that they're going to try and get Wally's speed back and then he'll be back to being the Kid Flash. But Barry's kind of questioning Hal's motivations for doing this. He doesn't believe that Hal is doing this for Wally. He believes that Hal is doing it for himself. But he's kind of keeping that to himself. He's not ready to blow up at Hal about it. He's just going to let things play out and see what Hal's real intentions are. So, because Barry and Hal have gotten in the way, Black Hand and Mirror Master are going to have to kill them if they're gonna be able to get away with the money. So, because Black Hand has stolen Kid Flash's speed, he's able to now shoot it into different things. So he shoots the speed into a nearby car, which causes it to speed out of control. So Wally tries to stop it with his new lantern abilities by creating a racetrack, and that just causes the car to continue picking up speed. And so in order to stop the car, Barry pulls its tires off. And that allows the car to come to a screeching halt. And Wally apologizes, and Hal is like, it's okay, like, you're still getting used to using your powers and, you know, how to create good constructs. And that's when Mirror Master attacks a nearby building, which causes a couple of helicopters, like, he shoots a beam at the building and it bounces off the windows of the building and hits a couple of helicopters, so it causes them to lose control. So Wally and Hal try to stop the helicopters. Hal manages to stop one with just a giant hand construct. Wally tries to stop one of the helicopters with a construct as well, but it's yellow, and Hal didn't tell him that Green Lantern's powers don't work on yellow. So Wally instead picks up a piece of road to catch the helicopter on it, and it works. So Hal and Wally are celebrating about saving these helicopters. And Barry's like, we shouldn't be celebrating yet. We still got to stop the two villains that are currently on the run. And Hal and Wally are like, it's all right. We'll be able to do this together. And so Hal's kind of treating Wally as like, kind of like his sidekick. And Barry's just kind of left looking at them like, all right. And meanwhile, Iris and Eve are wondering where Barry and Hal are because they're kind of late. And she's like, there's no way it's taking them this long to drop off Wally. And she's starting to think like, man, what do I see in Barry? You know? Like, they're starting to question what they see in the two men that they're in relationships with. And this is the opportunity that Barry takes to find out Hal's motivations for making Wally into the Kid Lantern. He pretty much accuses Hal of doing this because Hal's life is imperfect according to Barry, and that he's jealous of how Barry's life is so stable and that Hal's life is kind of like just going from job to job. So he's trying to take Wally and make him into like his own sidekick so he can feel how Barry feels, you know, having that great life of having a sidekick and having a wife and being like having a great job. Like, he's trying to take at least one part of that from Barry. And Hal is just like, you're such an idiot. Like, I don't want your life. Like, your stable life is what I call jail. You know, the reason why I did this for Wally is so that he could help. It has nothing to do with me. So they find Black Hand and Mirror Master at a hockey rink where they've caused all of the hockey players to go out of control by, you know, putting speed into them. So Barry and Hal try to stop these hockey men while Wally goes searching for Black Hand and Mirror Master because they believe that they're going to be in the building somewhere. And he actually sees Black Hand and Mirror Master watching Hal and Barry. from another room, and he sees them send a weird mirror device flying at Barry and Hal, which catches them in the device because Hal and Barry are still kind of rocky with their relationship and they're not thinking straight, and so it catches them off guard and they get trapped in this mirror device. And Hal tries breaking out, but all it does is bounce against the walls. And Barry actually got hit in the head by a hockey puck, so he's kind of like out of it at the moment. So neither of them can break out of this place. And so Blackhand and Mirror Master try to kill Hal and Barry, but Wally appears in front of them, and Blackhand is like, well, there's nothing you can do against us because I've stolen your powers and I can just shoot them at you and cause you to speed uncontrollably. And as he goes and tries to shoot Wally, his device just disappears. He's like, whoa, what happened to my device? And then Wally is like, is this what you're looking for? And he's holding Blackhand's device, and he's like, sorry, there's no more juice in it. Now that I've pumped all its speed back into me. And so Wally quickly transforms back into his Kid Flash costume, and he breaks Hal and Barry out of the mirror prison that they're stuck in. And then Blackhand and Mirror Master try to take down Hal and Barry and Kid Flash, but they're just too fast, and so they just beat the crap out of them and defeat Blackhand and Mirror Master. Mirror Master actually tries to abandon Blackhand by using his mirror to teleport away, but Hal just destroys his mirror. And Blackhand was just like, how is it possible? Like, how did he get a hold of my device? And Wally reveals to them that he found them in the other room, and he used his lantern ring to steal the device from Blackhand and then created a fake device for Blackhand to use, and then shot himself with the real device to give himself his powers back. And Hal questions why Wally didn't stop the mirror from trapping them, and Barry reckons that he wanted to use his super speed to save them to prove that he, like, his heart, like, is with Barry and not Hal. And Barry's like, but I don't even think he's that good. And Wally kind of just smirks a little bit and is just like, So it's kind of just like, you know, playing with Barry and Hal's mind a little bit. And so after that's all over, Barry, Iris, Hal, and Eve and Wally go to a nearby diner for dinner. Wally's not supposed to be there, but it turns out he ended up just tagging along. You know, because they got a bit sidetracked. They won't tell Iris and Eve what happened, but they got a bit sidetracked, so they thought they'd bring Wally to dinner with them. And they're like, Iris is just like, why were you late? And they kind of struggle with coming up with a they're gonna just like, oh well, you see, Aunt Iris. And that's when Eve spits out her coffee and is basically like, how could you eat in this place? It's like a pig trough. And Barry's just like, I really like her, Hal. And Hal's just like, thanks, guy. Because, you know, Eve saved their butts then. She kind of interrupted, you know, and took Iris's mind off of questioning them about what they were doing. And that's where it ends. It ends right there. And so we move on to the next issue. I will say, issue 2 was pretty good. I think, honestly, I think it was better than the first issue, just because it's really nice seeing Wally interact with Barry and Hal. It's cool seeing Barry and Hal team up against Blackhand and Mirror Master, who are two classic Flash and Green Lantern villains. And there's also another cool thing that was in that issue that I forgot to mention was Barry at one point mentions Wally becoming the next Flash. Like, he says to Wally that, like, once he's in a retirement home, he'll be expecting Wally to take over the mantle. So it's really cool how Mark confirms that even way back then, Barry was expecting Wally to eventually become the Flash, whether or not he died. So that's really cool. So anyone who says that like, oh, Wally only became the Flash because Barry died, it's like, no, he would have become the Flash when Barry retired. Like Barry would have passed the mantle onto him regardless. But the next issue that we're going to be talking about, issue 3, is a team up between Harry, Bal, Jay, and Alan. Yep, that's right. The original Flash and Green Lantern are going to team up with the then current versions of Flash and Green Lantern. So, really excited for this one because I love Jay Garrick and I love Alan Scott. And you don't often get to see them team up with both. Like, I think this might be the first time they've ever teamed up with both Hal and Barry. Because they've teamed up with Wally and Kyle in that previous Flash Green Lantern crossover that we read. But I don't think they ever teamed up with both Hal and Barry at the same time. Normally it was separate. Normally it was Jay teaming up with Barry and Alan teaming up with Hal. So it's cool to see them all join together as one big group. So the next issue begins with Hal and Barry meeting up outside of a store in order to pick up some. They need to pick up some groceries because they're planning to meet up with Alan and Jay Garrick, the original Green Lantern and Flash, so they can go on a camping trip with them, to spend time with them. Because at this point in time, when this takes place, they don't know Alan and Jay very well. They've only met him a couple of times through Justice League and JSA meetings. So this is kind of the first time that Hal and Barry are gonna properly bond with Jay and Alan. Hal got to the store first and was waiting for Barry to show up because, as usual, Barry is late. And as usual, Hal doesn't have money for the groceries. He picked them all out, and then he was like, can you spot me, Barry? And Barry's just like, fine, as usual. Meanwhile, they're late to meet with Alan and Jay, and they're like, much like Barry and Hal, there is splitting personality between Jay and Alan that causes them to kind of like come at odds sometimes. Alan's definitely a lot stiffer than Jay, a little bit more fussy. He hates people being late and stuff, while Jay is kind of more laid back, and he's kind of just they're gonna come, like, don't worry, Alan, stop getting in such a tiff, it's not worth it. And so Hal and Barry eventually arrive, and then the four of them decide to head off on their vacation. And because they're superheroes, they don't just go on vacation in the forest, they go vacationing on another planet. So Hal has said that he looked through the database of the Green Lantern Corps and found the perfect planet for them to spend their vacation on. While they're heading to the planet, they give a little bit of a rundown on the origins of the characters. We've already gone through Hal and Barry. If you didn't know, Jay Garrick got his powers by accidentally huffing chemicals. Like, he spilt chemicals on the ground and he inhaled them, and it was hard water, and he inhaled them, and then it gave him powers. That's all comics in the 40s. What are you gonna do? And then Alan ended up in a train accident, and when he awoke, he found the lantern, and then, got its power. Or his origin kind of shifts around. In this one, it's he found the lantern. Eventually, it would be he finds a meteor, and then he would forge it into a lantern once he discovered its abilities, and it would kind of like speak to him and kind of tell him to become Green Lantern. Like, the thought of becoming Green Lantern would appear in his head, and he would know how to make the Green Lantern and stuff. Like, at this point in time, Alan has no connection to the Guardians, but eventually it'd be retconned that his lantern was made out of Guardian energy that they had thrown away, and it landed on Earth. So basically their trash became his lantern. So he'd set his ring coordinates to take them directly to the planet, but eventually he starts getting, like, the communications with the planet become weird, and he can't find the planet anymore. And Alan's like, it's all good. I'll just use my ring to help us get to a hospitable planet. And so he tells his ring to take him there, and they end up at a planet. Barry actually asks Alan why he couldn't use his ring to find a planet, and why they're using Hal's ring to go through the Guardian database. And Alan is like, because I'm not actually connected to the Guardians. I'm not a member of the Green Lantern Corps. So they end up on this planet, and Alan decides to start building the tent. Hal offers his help, and Alan is like, nah, it's probably better if I do it. There's this kind of reoccurring theme in this where Jay and Barry seem to get along incredibly well and are pretty close already, but Hal and Alan don't get well along at all because of how judgmental Alan is of Hal's current lifestyle. Because, Barry and Jay and Alan have very stable careers and lives, but Hal's life is constantly changing. And it's shown in the relationships where, Barry and Alan kind of get on Hal's nerves by kind of badgering him all the time about getting his life straight and, like, doing something and not just quitting jobs all the time and moving places. Jay's the only one who isn't like that with Hal. He kind of just leaves it alone because he knows it's not his business to tell Hal what to do. Meanwhile, Hal is sick of constantly hearing Jay and Barry talk about their lives, which he sees as being mundane, because Barry and Jay go through the same routine every day. They have Joanne and Iris. They're fighting the same villains every day. Like, Barry is always just fighting Mirror Master or Gorilla Grodd or Abracadabra. Like, nothing changes, and that gets on Hal's nerves, and he hates having to listen to it. He actually blows up at them in this and is like, don't you guys ever want something different in your life? Like, how are you so okay with your lives just being so mundane and boring all the time, like, and repetitive? So it's kind of like a bit of a meta commentary from Mark Waid on the different eras, like on the different series, where like The Flash was a very consistent series where Barry's life didn't change very much, and the only thing that really changed was whatever villain he was fighting that day, and his life wouldn't really be shaken up until Iris's death in the late 70s. And meanwhile, Hal's, like, the Green Lantern comics were the complete opposite, where it was constantly changing. One second Hal was teaching people how to fly, the next second he was a toy salesman, and at this point in time, he's not even living in Coast City anymore. Like, Barry never moved cities the entire time that he was in his own comic series. Meanwhile, Hal spent a large portion of his time on a road trip, traveling to different places, living from place to place. So it's very interesting that, like, and it's great that Mark and Tom like went deep into this and tried to see from a character's perspective how this would affect their relationship. So while they're on the planet getting wood, because Alan Scott's ring doesn't work on wood, so Hal, Jay, and Barry go to get wood for the fire, a sandstorm just comes out of nowhere, and because Hal's lantern ring doesn't work on yellow, he can't do anything to protect them from it, and Barry can't run on a sandstorm. So they have to fuse their abilities together. So what Hal does is he launches Barry into the air from a Green Lantern construct cannon, and then Barry spins his arms around really fast, creating speed tornadoes that disperse the sandstorm. And by the time they get back to where Alan is, Alan's built this crazy tent that is pretty much just like a futuristic looking house. And Barry starts looking for, because they start setting up, stuff to make some food, like a barbecue and that. And Barry is like, hey, Hal, you brought the food with you, like, where is it? And he starts going through Hal's stuff, and Hal's like, wait, Barry, don't go through there, like, it's just work stuff in there. And that's when Barry finds a little toy bear with Hug Me on it. And this is when they discover what Hal's current job is at the moment, which is he is a toy salesman. I said previously that I hoped that they would mention this and make it a part of the story, and they delivered. Yeah, everyone kind of makes fun of Hal being a toy salesman, including Alan. He kind of like turns his nose up at it, and then they find out, and this is exactly true, this is canon, Hal was dating his biggest competitor at the time too, Olivia, who owned a toy company. But she was one of those ridiculous, like, cartoonish competitors where she pretty much became a supervillain by the end. That's how desperate she was. She wanted to get the rights to Green Lantern, and she actually got the rights to use Green Lantern and create action figures of him. And this caused problems with Hal because he didn't have, like, he learnt that he didn't have the rights to his own likeness. Which is pretty messed up, and it's actually something that like Brian Michael Bendis would do in the Ultimate Spider-Man series with Kingpin, where Kingpin would buy the rights to Spider-Man's likeness and start making merchandise of Spider-Man just to mess with him. Like that's exactly what Olivia did with Green Lantern. So it's like the fact that a story like that was done like 30 years before it would be done again, is kind of crazy because everyone kind of sees Bendis as being the one who kind of like created that kind of story of a character doing that to a superhero, but like what you wouldn't know is that Green Lantern did that first a long time before. Alan obviously jabs Hal for dating his competitor, and Jay is like, "You're one to talk. You tried dating a supervillain." Because there's this villain called the Harley Quinn, not the one you're thinking of, who eventually ended up with Alan and had children with him, and which are Jade and Obsidian. And she was originally a supervillain, and then she eventually became an FBI agent. And that's what Alan says. He's like, she's an FBI agent, though. And Jay was like, yeah, eventually she became one, but she started off as a villain. So Hal, Jay, and Alan decide to go to sleep, and Barry. And they realize that Barry has brought, like, pajamas and like a robe and stuff camping and a picture of Iris and an alarm clock, and Hal's just like, afraid I didn't bring a razor, Jay. After all, I figured we'd be roughing it. And Barry's just like, I just wanted to be comfortable. And Hal's like, wait, there's no mint on my pillow. Barry, can I have yours? And so Barry goes to sleep, and all of a sudden, the four of them begin sinking into the ground because it turns out they've built their tent on top of quicksand that has appeared out of nowhere. And because it's quicksand, the Flashes can't run in it. Alan doesn't have his ring because he can't just materialize it on his hand like Hal. And the quicksand is yellow, so Hal can't use his powers. So it's like the planet is using their weaknesses against them. So Hal grabs Barry's costume and wraps it around his hand because it's red, and then uses his ring energy for like to blast the inside of the costume, which helps them launch, like, because everyone grabs onto Hal and then he launches everyone out of the quicksand, freeing them. And so Hal comes to the conclusion that like this is way too coincidental and that the planet must be like actually trying to kill them or have some kind of grudge against them, because it keeps creating their abilities, and so like their weaknesses. And so Hal goes off to go searching for any answers, and while he's away for a little bit, because he gets frustrated at Alan and how Alan's been treating him this whole time, so he kind of leaves to spend some time alone for a little bit. And as soon as he leaves, Alan, Barry, and Jay get attacked by these little bugs, so Hal comes back to try and stop them, and his ring powers don't work on them, and they're made out of wood, so they're kind of just like, why aren't Hal's abilities working against these bugs? And then the bugs all join together to create a ginormous bug made out of wood, which Alan manages to defeat by grabbing a rock and smashing its head open. And that's when Hal finally puts two and two together, and he claims that Alan is the reason why this is all happening, and that he created all of this to teach him some kind of stupid lesson. And Alan is like, you're exactly right, Hal. I did this to try and teach you about having a struggle. and that he believed that Hal Jordan ought to learn what Green Lanterns already know, and this really pisses off Hal, and he's just like, "You manipulated us all. How dare you act ashamed of me?" And Alan's just like, "I'm not. I'm proud of you. I couldn't imagine a worthier heir. As a ring wielder, you're top notch, but as a man, you worry me. I've been keeping my eye on you, son, and I've seen the way you operate. You'll never have the success I've enjoyed if you keep ditching your job and your town whenever things get rough. That's taking the easy way out." And Hal's just like, "The easy way out? You think it's easy to keep starting over with nobody at your side and nothing but the clothes on your back? You think it's quitting to keep going when nothing works out? You think you'd have the guts to suffer that again and again and again and again?" And Alan's just like, "I'll never know. You want to one up on me? There it is." And Hal's like, "Well, then maybe we've both made our points. Thanks for the boost, Pops, but I'll be fine." And Alan's like, "I know." And that's when they kind of like make up, and Alan's like, "I'm sorry for ruining everyone's vacation just to teach Hal a stupid lesson." And Hal's like, "You can make it up for us. We got 2 days. We'll find another place." And Barry and Jay kind of realize that, like, maybe Barry's not as close to Hal as he realized, because he didn't know that Hal was going through so much trouble of, like, hopping jobs and places, like, living different places. And Jay is like, "Alan and I aren't here to boss both of you around and, like, or at least that's not your job. Your job, Barry, isn't to push Hal around and try and get him on the straight and narrow. That's kind of our job as surrogate fathers. So if you get out of line, maybe I'll have to whip your ass." And Barry's like, "Is that a threat?" And Jay's like, "Try it and you'll find out." And Hal's just like, "Do you draw everybody out like this?" And Alan's like, "Just building bridges, kid. Just building bridges." And so it's just a happy little ending where, Hal and Alan have started to grow closer, and Jay and Barry are starting to, there's a little bit more of a complication coming to their relationship when they realize it's not just going to be all sunshine and rainbows, and that Jay will push Barry whenever he needs it. But yeah, it's a great issue, and I'm really looking forward to the next issue because it guest stars Green Arrow, which could only mean one thing: that this issue takes place during the Hard Traveling Heroes crossover, and we'll get to see because Ollie is one of Hal's other best friends, and you don't see him and Barry and Ollie interact with each other, the three of them. So this will be really interesting. We'll be able to see Barry's reaction to Ollie and Ollie's reaction to Barry, whether or not they get along, both being best friends of Hal Jordan, both being very different people, pretty much complete opposites, even more opposite than Hal and Barry are. So with this issue of Brave and the Bold, what we're essentially getting is just a lost episode of Hard Traveling Heroes, because obviously this takes place during Hard Traveling Heroes. Ollie and Hal haven't been on the road for very long. They've been on the road, I'd say this is about like 8 to 10 issues into Hard Traveling Heroes, because in that series they were traveling around with Upper Aliatza, who is a guardian, and at a certain point Ollie told him to get lost and he left, and this issue begins with him bragging about how he told the Guardian to get lost, and Hal's like, "I know, I was there." So this is after Upper Aliapsa has left the Green Arrow, Green Lantern book. And to kind of paint the picture on what's currently going on in Central City, because with Hal and Ollie, it's simple as, they've just been traveling around to different places, dealing with political situations and economic situations, and Hal's kind of being taught what America is like while he's not while he's out in space. So in Central City, Barry isn't really spending much time as the Flash, because at this point in time in the comics, there was a new administration had come into Central City, a new mayor whose name is Fist, and he created this whole band of this new squad of cops, and they have pretty much sent like they've sanctioned Central City and are like incredibly um boxed in, and they enact on crime like in a very rough way that Barry kind of like frowns upon, and he's not super happy that they've taken over the city, especially because he doesn't really get to be the Flash anymore. Iris is happy because it means that she gets to spend more time with Barry, but Barry doesn't think that Fist's intentions might be entirely good, and he's having a hard time standing up to Fist because so far Fist hasn't really given him any reason to actually distrust him. But that would soon come when Hal and Ollie decide to rock by Central City because Ollie has heard about Fist and the police, and because Ollie has a rough history with police, and especially situations like this when they're kind of getting out of hand with how they're controlling. Like, as soon as they start trying to take control of an entire city in a pressuring way that is, violent and kind of scary, that's when Ollie steps in and is like, well, we gotta go and check out the situation, and if we need to deal with it, then we deal with it. And Hal doesn't want to stop off in Central City because he knows Barry is there, and he doesn't want Barry and Ollie interacting with each other. And he also hasn't seen Barry in months because he's been busy hanging out with Ollie, so he and Barry have kind of drifted apart. As soon as they arrive in the city, immediately they get arrested because it turns out that the car they're driving is unregistered, and Ollie is like, you're gonna be busy trying to arrest me for some stupid paperwork instead of arresting people that actually deserve to be arrested. Like, he starts having a problem with the police, and he's like, so I forgot to renew my car. Who gives a crap? And he doesn't even really provoke the police. Hal holds him back, but the police just unwarranted hit Ollie over the head, and Hal is like, whoa, that's too far. I'm gonna have to ask you to stand down. And then another one of the cops just hits Hal over the head and knocks him out. And Barry gets called in by Fist to check out the cells, and that's when he discovers that Hal and Ollie have been taken in. And that's when Barry kind of realizes, maybe Fist and his men aren't right for the city if they're arresting people like Hal and Ollie. So Barry helps out Hal and Ollie retrieve their weapons, like the lantern and Ollie's bow and arrows, so that Fist and his cops don't realize who they took in. Because I guess they brought in the lantern and bow without even realizing that it was Green Arrow and Green Lanterns. So yeah, they use the lantern to get out of the prison, and the cops are just like, hey, what was that? Oh, my mistake, there's nothing in here. After that, they head to a local diner where they decide to order some food. As a little bit of a reference to Hard Traveling Heroes and just Green Arrow in general, Ollie orders some chili, which is his favorite thing, and it was a running gag in Hard Traveling Heroes that Ollie made the spiciest chili ever, and like Hal had a hard time eating it, and it's always been a running gag that like other heroes, I think there's a Justice League issue or a Justice League splash page where Ollie makes chili for everyone, and they're all having a hard time eating it, except for, I think, like Firestorm or someone, like people who especially Martian Manhunter. It actually hurts him because he isn't good with fire, and so the curry like really harms him, which is a little bit goofy. I kind of like that. But Barry and Ollie get into an argument over Fist and his people, and Barry is like, they might go a little bit too far, but like the answer isn't attacking them and taking them down. And meanwhile, Ollie is like, no, we got to take those guys down. We got to take those creeps down. They're attacking innocent people. Like, it seems like they're not just stopping criminals, but they're stopping anyone from from doing almost anything without breaking the law. And they're taking things too far. Like, violence should never be the answer, and the fact that these cops are using violence to bring down not only criminals but just anyone, that's a problem and it needs to be stopped. And Barry kind of stops during mid-argument, and Hal is like, this isn't just about Fist. Like, what is this about? And that's when Barry reveals that it's also the fact that he's not getting to be the Flash anymore, and Fist's men are scaring him. And so they decide to go and pay Fist a visit, especially once they see a rally nearby of people rallying up against Fist's men. And so they have to stop this rally because otherwise it might lead to these innocent people getting hurt by Fist and his men. And so that's kind of the last straw. And so Barry, Ollie, and Hal go in to speak with Fist. And Fist is like, even you, Barry? Like, we're friends. And he's like, Barry's just like, so long as it stays friendly, Mayor. Friendship's not the prevalent attitude in Central these days. And Fist is just like, pour me some liberal wine. These are tough times, Flash, and I bring tough measures. Unlike you, I was elected by decent middle-class families who deserve to enjoy the fruits of their honest labors without being atomized by killer boomerangs or trapped in mirrors. And Ollie's just like, if you flipped your bird, a town that trades freedom for security is living a paranoid delusion. That's not a dream, brother, that's a nightmare. And he's like, spare me your arrogance. My people understand what I'm giving them, and they're hungry for peace at any price. So if you'll excuse me, and he just tells them to leave, and they're like, well, that didn't work out the way we needed. And Hal's like, it's fine, I found a secret file. Like, while you were arguing with Fist, I went through his stuff. I found this file called Project Rehab. It turns out that Fist is planning on starting with, like, and it's going to start with Central City, but eventually he's hoping to expand to all of America. He's going to get every criminal lobotomized. That is his way of fixing crime. That's his solution. And so they're like, all right, Fist is bad. Like, Fist is evil. Like, he's literally going to lobotomize every criminal. Everyone. Even if it's like, oh, you just, had an unregistered car and you kind of, like, didn't want to get taken in. Like, you resisted arrest. You'd probably be lobotomized. So they're like, that's a problem. We got to stop that. So they go directly to where a couple of criminals, like, have been already transferred. It turns out these criminals are Mirror Master and Captain Cold. They are the test subjects for the lobotomy. So they head there and they take down the guards, and then they free Cold and Mirror Master from their cage. And that's when Fist comes over and he's like, you've messed with me for the last time. It's time that I showed you my new squad and one of my greatest creations of all time, the Metacop. And so a squad of cops come out, and then a giant cop alongside them, who is clearly a robot, comes out, called the Metacop, which is clearly a reference to RoboCop, which is a fun little reference to that. And so Ollie, Hal, and Barry have to fight against the Metacop and the other cops, but they're actually able to take Barry out because one of them has a whistle that really badly hurts his ears. And so he gets, hit by that whistle and then jabbed from behind by a stun baton, which knocks Barry to the ground. And so what Hal does is he just grabs Fist and brings him there. And then because he's Green Lantern, he's just like, hey, Mirror Master, Cold, you're deputized. Help us take care of these guys. And so Mirror Master and Captain Cold help fight against Fist's men and defeat them. And then Fist is forced to stand down and change his ways and get his squad out of Central City because the Flash is taken over again. He's dealing with crime from now on, not Fist. Captain Cold and Mirror Master make a break for it, and Ollie is like, I'll take care of them. I was the one that freed them from the cage, so you guys go and have a drink or something. And so Fist gets arrested. The Flash becomes the main protector of Central City again, and Ollie and Hal, Hal decides to stay in Central City for a bit, while Ollie meets his ride, which is Black Canary. Black Canary shows up at the very end, and she's just like, "So, like, what was going on in Central City? You know, what did you bust up this time?" And Ollie's like, "Me? Nothing as important as what I put back together, lady." And it ends with Hal and Barry kind of shaking hands, and because Hal wanted to stay behind and spend more time with Barry because he just hasn't seen him for a long time. So while this isn't the end of Hal and Ollie and the Hard Traveling Heroes, this is kind of like explaining the kind of break that they would sometimes have during the Green Lantern Green Arrow comic, where Green Arrow would go off with Black Canary for a little bit and Hal would kind of be on his own for a bit. But yeah, like I said, great issue. Awesome issue. I love this issue, especially because I loved Green Arrow, Green Lantern. I've read the whole thing, so it just felt like I was just reading another issue of that. And obviously, it was dedicated to Denny O'Neil, who sadly is no longer with us. I think he passed away in 2020. Yeah. R.I.P. Denny O'Neil. Incredible. One of the greatest Green Lantern and Green Arrow runs of all time. But yeah, that's it for that issue. And so we're going to be moving on to issue 4. So I actually made a mistake previously. I said we were going to be reading issue 4, but no, we just read issue 4. We're reading issue 5. And issue 5 begins with a Green Lantern known as Epikar Hrui. Because it gives us kind of an intro to like the Green Lantern Corps and stuff. And we meet this one lantern, Epikar. And we find that he is charging head straight on with what looks like a giant sun, like a bowl of energy that looks like a sun. And he is like the Green Lanterns are known for being fearless but not stupid, and yet for some reason this Green Lantern just decides to head straight into the sun, completely obliterating him. The Green Lanterns watch on, like, not the Green Lanterns, the Guardians watch on from a distance and say that, like, they had created their Green Lanterns to lack fear, but that's actually starting to become a problem, and that they're going to need to have to get some help to deal with this situation. And the help that they need is from Barry Allen. So they use their energy to grab Barry Allen. It's the first time he arrives on time at home. Iris is happy to see him not be late for once, but as soon as he arrives, he gets taken away by the Guardians, leaving nothing but his shoes. So he spends the rest of the issue wearing his socks without any boots. He gets summoned to the Guardians, and the reason why they picked Barry to come instead of Hal is because this isn't, like, that wasn't the first Green Lantern to be killed by this sun. It's killed 9 lanterns so far, and the Guardians have figured that whatever this thing is that looks like a sun, it has the ability to amplify emotions. And so because Green Lanterns are fearless, it amplifies their fearlessness and makes them foolhardy, so they don't have a sense of self-preservation anymore. They'll just kill themselves for no reason. So they need Barry in order to try and fix this, because they think, oh, because it's been affecting Green Lanterns, maybe it's not going to affect Barry, because he doesn't have, like, he's not powered entirely by fearlessness, so they think, like, oh, it's probably not going to affect him, right? So they send Barry off to go and deal with this giant sun. Meanwhile, Hal Jordan at this point in time is a truck driver. This is during the end of the Denny O'Neil run on Green Lantern, because after he wrote Green Arrow and Green Lantern, he eventually, like, Green Arrow left the title and started getting his own stories in other books, and so Green Lantern went back to being a solo title, and Denny kept writing it for another, I think, 20 issues or so before he eventually passed it on to Mike W. Barr. And so at this point in time, Hal is a truck driver, and he has a little alien sidekick with him, who I love, called Iddy. I love Iddy so much. It's definitely an underrated Green Lantern character. I wish writers utilized him a lot more. There's a couple of references to stuff that would happen to Itty. Like, there's a reason Itty hasn't shown up in comics, but there's no reason he couldn't continue showing up. And just kind of be like, oh, well, he's back. Hal mentions that, like, Itty hasn't turned into some giant monster, and having read Green Lantern, I can tell you now that is a reference to what would eventually happen to Itty, where he would go through a allergic reaction in the future that would cause him to grow in considerable size and start destroying everything in his path uncontrollably. So that's a nice little reference to that. So Hal, while he's driving his truck, gets a call from Iris because she wants him to go and look for Barry because he's been taken away. So Hal decides to go and talk to the Guardians to find out what happened to Barry. Meanwhile, Barry finds this giant thing that looks like a sun, and he runs straight into it and starts trying to run through it to get to the center. But he realizes that for some reason he can't run as fast as he normally does inside this thing. Hal goes and talks to the Guardians, and the Guardians just straight up lie to Hal because they don't want him knowing what they're doing, and it doesn't work. They think that they fooled him because they're just like, oh, the lantern battery is busy at the moment. Like, sorry, we don't need your help. And Hal just knows they're lying, and he uses the lantern battery to see where Barry is, because the lantern battery can kind of see any part of the universe. Like, you can use it to kind of see different parts of the universe. So he uses it to see where Barry is, and he finds him inside the giant sun. So Hal, being friends with Barry, wants to go and help him. And right before Barry is actually destroyed by the sun, Hal manages to grab him and pull him out, and he explains to Barry that the reason why he's not running as fast as he usually does in this thing is because it's not amplified, because this thing amplifies, like, the emotions of a person, or, like, them key feature. So Barry assumed that it would amplify his speed, and so did the Guardians, but Hal is like, no, it's not amplifying the Flash, it's amplifying Barry Allen, and as we know, Barry Allen at the core is slow as molasses, so that's why it was slowing you down, because that being slow is what is at your core when you're not the Flash. So Hal tries to head straight into the sun, but Barry is like, we're gonna have to go in together, because if you go in by yourself, you're gonna die. I need to show you what's at the center and what's been killing all the other Guardians. And Barry pulls Hal to the center of this sun, and they find this yellow orb and all the corpses of the previous Green Lanterns that have flown into it. Because it's yellow, that's why the Green Lanterns have been dying, because their weakness is yellow. So instead, what Hal and Barry do is they use their powers together to try and contain the sun and try and destroy it. So Barry runs around the surface of the sun enough to create a bunch of hydrogen atoms that Hal can then condense to try and create, like, a condensed atomic layer around the sun to keep it contained. And while they're doing this, Hal senses that something's going wrong with this sun, and so he grabs Barry and pulls him away, and it explodes out in an explosion of energy. And it turns out that Sinestro was hiding within the sun. Because he has a yellow ring, his weakness is not yellow, so the sun doesn't kill him, and his ring protects him from the sun. But he's the one that's been controlling this thing and getting it to kill other Guardians, because he wants to get revenge for the Guardians throwing him out of the Green Lantern Corps. So he tries to kill Hal Jordan and Barry Allen. He actually uses Barry against Hal Jordan because he knows that Hal Jordan fears the death of of his friends, and he thinks that Hal is going to, go into the sun to save his friend Barry, because he believes that Hal would fear the death of his friend, and by plunging into the sun would then start affecting Hal, causing him to run straight into it and die like all the other Green Lanterns. But what Sinestro doesn't count on is the fact that he's already lost, because by showing any level of fear, it completely goes against what the son is supposed to do. So instead of being completely foolhardy, it instead amplifies Hal's will to save Barry, and so he breaks Barry out of the cage, and Barry manages to take Sinestro's ring too. So like Hal distracts Sinestro. Barry grabs Sinestro's ring from behind and takes his ring away from him. And because Sinestro doesn't have a ring anymore, he's not being protected from this sun thing, and it explodes, and Sinestro blows up in a spark of energy, and he's just gone. Presumably not dead, but like they're kind of presuming that he might be dead. And Hal and Barry are just like, yeah, we did it. We beat Sinestro. It's not a problem anymore. Whee, let's go. And they head back to Earth. Like, they kind of just, like, immediately move on from the fact that Sinestro might be dead. I think it's just because Hal doesn't believe he's dead. So he's okay with kind of just moving on. They head back to Hal's truck, where Hal puts on his clothes, and so does Barry. And Barry says that, like, how do you deal with not, like, having any fear? Like, where does your fearlessness even come from? And Hal is like, well, the truth is, I think the reason why I'm so fearless is because I've never actually had any real attachment to anything, so I've never had anything to fear about. Especially, like, people in, like, danger or anything. So it's assuming that Hal, finally realized that he does have fear when people he loves are in danger, and Barry is one of the people that he loves. And that's not saying that, like, Hal wouldn't have felt fear if Carol was in danger or Thomas was in danger. I think this is just the moment that he finally realized that is where his fear comes from, and that he doesn't lack fear, and that it does exist. It exists whenever people he loves are in danger. And Barry is just like, you mean Itty, right? And Hal's just like, shut up, Barry. Because obviously he's talking about Barry. Just a nice little ending of them heading straight back to Earth. And so that's the end of issue 5, which means that we've come to the end of this miniseries with issue 6, where Barry and Hal must face the Star Sapphire, aka Carol Ferris's evil personality. So a couple of things worth noting with this issue is that what we're about to talk about is what was essentially Hal and Barry's final adventure together, just the two of them. This takes place just after, or not long after, Iris had been killed. It mentions that she's been avenged at this point. Obviously, Mark Waid knows that she wasn't really avenged yet, but the characters within the universe think she's been avenged. They think that they've captured the one responsible. They haven't learnt that it was actually Professor Zoom, Eobard Thawne, or Reverse Flash, who was responsible for killing her. But this is kind of the first issue where we see that, like, the roles are reversed between Barry and Hal. Like, in previous issues, it was always Barry kind of, like, being the shoulder for Hal, because Hal was going through problems, his life's constantly changing. But in this one, Barry's life is the one that's in a rut, and Hal's life is back on track. Like, he's working at Ferris Airlines again, he's been reunited with his best friend Thomas Kalmaku, he's working for Carol again. That's the only real problem he has, is that his relationship with Carol is pretty bad at the moment. They previously, he'd almost gotten married to her, and that fell through, and so now she's kind of like taken on more of like a boss and employee relationship with Hal, where she doesn't like him working for her because she sees him as like a lacking employee, but also she's kind of being a bit biased because of their prior relationship, so it makes her extra hard on Hal. But Hal, instead of focusing on his own life, just wants to focus on making Barry feel better, because Barry is currently very depressed over over Iris. And then so they're at Ferris Airlines, and Hal is trying to help Barry feel better. And all of a sudden, one of the Ferris Airlines towers just starts melting. And Hal tells Barry to not put his costume on so that he doesn't risk his secret identity. But Barry just doesn't listen and puts on his costume anyway and tries to save the people from the tower. And there's this weird purple beam that is responsible for melting the tower. And the beam kind of hits Barry. He's like, "You're safe, just relax, keep your muscles slack." And as he's finishing his sentence, he gets hit by this weird beam, and it causes him to suddenly become very angry. He's like, "Tear you limb from limb!" And then he leaves the beam, and he's like, "Oh, what the hell was that? Like, that was weird. Where did that sudden burst of anger come from?" Thomas Kalmaku knows immediately who is behind this, and he tries to tell Barry. He's like, "I have to tell you about the tower. Flash, please. It's important." And then he gets blasted from behind by somebody, and it hurts Thomas a lot, but doesn't, like, he's fine. Hal scans him and sees the residual energy, and that's when they realize that it was Star Sapphire. Star Sapphire is behind this, and they know that Star Sapphire is Carol Ferris. And the history behind Star Sapphire is that there are multiple. So there are 2 Star Sapphires. Barry even mentions the first one, who was a enemy of Jay Garrick, who got trapped in the 7th dimension by Jay, because it was the only way to, to stop her. So the Zamorans are a race of aliens who existed alongside the Guardians, and they eventually ended up mating in order to, like, because we've read Millennium, they ended up mating with each other to create New Guardians, which is how the New Guardians came about and stuff. But we're not here to talk about that. If you want to learn about that, go watch the Millennium video that I did, the Millennium videos. There's a lot of those. But the Zamorans, the thing that they would do is they would go around and they'd basically just pick a human woman to become their queen, and that person would become the Scarlet Sapphire. So they picked one originally, and for currently unknown reasons that we'll find out later, they discarded that Scarlet Sapphire to be trapped in the 7th dimension and decided to pick a new Scarlet Sapphire, which was Carol Ferris. And so, for unknown reasons, Carol is, because normally as Star Sapphire, she's like evil, but she's never this evil. Like, she is ruthless at the moment, trying to kill Hal and Barry, and Hal is just like, she's never acted this evil before. And Barry gets hit again by this weird purple beam, which makes him angry enough to try and kill Star Sapphire, and Hal is like, "No, Barry, like, we're not trying to kill her." And he's like, "Oh god, I'm sorry, I don't know what, wait, like, what's that?" And Hal's like, "What do you mean, what's that? What are you talking about?" Barry's like, "That weird purple hole." He's like, What are you talking about, Barry? I don't see anything." So Barry jumps into this purple hole that this beam that keeps making him evil is coming from. Meanwhile, Hal is stuck with Star Sapphire. And Barry ends up in the 7th dimension, where he finds this thing responsible for shooting the purple beam. It's like this weird thing made out of roots and stuff. And he tries tearing it apart, and that's when the roots start tangling around him. And Hal tries to keep Star Sapphire contained, and she's just too angry and is like, "Let me out so I can destroy you." And Hal's just like, "No, like, there must be something wrong. You're never this angry. Like, Carol, you gotta listen to me." And Star Sapphire is like, "I'm not Carol, I'm Star Sapphire." And that's when Barry finds out who is really behind all this. It's the original Star Sapphire from the 7th dimension, who is a lot older now. And Barry even makes fun of her and is just like, "Jay's aged a lot better than you have." But basically, the original Star Sapphire is jealous of the new Star Sapphire because she was thrown away by the Zamorans. And the reason why she was thrown away by the Zamorans is because the Zamorans are supposed to feel superior to men. Like, that is their whole thing. they do not fear men. And the original Scarlet Sapphire is afraid of men. Like, that's just a thing that she has. She has a fear of men. And because she's afraid of men, I don't know why. It's kind of hinted that maybe she was in, like, abusive relationships in the past, and so she's kind of gained this fear towards men. Maybe it was, like, her father or something. That's kind of, like, the idea, or, like, that's the only kind of reasons I would think that she would be so afraid. But that's why she was cast, like, that's why she was discarded by the Scarlet Sapphires, and so she's trying to get her revenge by fueling her anger and hatred through this purple beam into Scarlet Sapphire to make her do her bidding and make her as angry as she is. And that's why when Barry was getting hit by the purple beam, his anger was coming out and he was becoming incredibly angry. And because of that, the original Scarlet Sapphire has decided to use Barry as the vessel for shooting the purple beam, because he is filled with a lot more rage and anger than she is over the death of Iris. So she starts fueling it through him. Meanwhile, Carol creates an entire room made out of yellow, full of, like, yellow buzzsaws and stuff, and dares Hal to come to the other side of the room to grab her, which obviously he can't because yellow is his weakness. Barry manages to break out of the Scarlet Sapphire's grasp, and that's when he calls her out for, like, her fear of men, and it causes her to become so distressed that she escapes. She chooses to escape out of the 7th dimension. She's like, "Get away from me! Like, I will rule! I will have my vengeance on my sisters!" And she breaks out of the 7th dimension with Barry in pursuit, and that's when she tries to manipulate Barry into killing the Star Sapphire, but that doesn't work, and she kind of just has a mental breakdown because of her fear of men, and she's just like, "Let go of me!" And Barry's like, "Still frightened? Believe me, I'll give you a reason to be afraid of me." And then he's like, "No!" And she kind of, like, just, like, the original Star Sapphire just kind of goes, like, and, like, disappears. She, like, teleports away or goes away. She gets away somehow. Like, she just uses her powers to vaporize out of there. And you're probably thinking to yourself, like, why is Barry acting like this? Like, why is he being such an asshole? And it's because of what he's going through. There's no excuse. Like, it's not great that he's acting this way, but it makes sense. You know, he's currently going through the struggles of losing his wife, and it's causing him to act out and be an asshole and be very angry. And it actually gets worse from here, because Barry tries to go out in a blaze of glory. He doesn't realize it himself, but Hal figures out that Barry's trying to commit suicide, because he runs straight at Scarlet Sapphire through this yellow room full of, like, all these buzzsaws and stuff. And he starts running into the buzzsaws and, like, refuses to, like, vibrate through them. And so Hal is just like, "Gotta stop it, Barry. Like, I'm not gonna let my friend commit suicide." And he, like, grabs Barry and pulls him to the floor, and he's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "You love Iris. We have to save her. We have to save her." And Hal's just like, "Oh my God." And Barry's like, "You love her with all your heart. She's everything. You can't live without her." And Hal's just like, Barry, listen to me. I do love Carol, but not like you loved Iris." And Barry's like, "But..." And Hal's just like, "Our relationship's more complicated than that. It always has been, and it probably always will be. She's not Iris, Barry. Who is she? Tell me." And Barry's like, "Carol. She's Carol." And Hal's like, "That's right. And she needs us to focus so we can all get out of here alive, okay?" And we get, like, a close-up of, like, Barry's eye as, like, a tear comes out. He's, like, out of his eye, and he's like, "Okay." He's like, "You have an idea?" And Barry's like, "Yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rub my hands together fast enough to create enough friction to create a fire, so that I can change all of the yellow objects in here orange by transmitting the heat from the friction between my hands into this room. So it turns the entire room orange so that Hal can actually affect it, and destroy the room. And then Hal catches Star Sapphire and pulls her crown off, which takes away her powers, transforming her back into Carol Ferris. And she's just kind of like left wondering what's going on. She's like, Green Lantern, like, what happened? Like, easy, everything's alright now. And Barry's like, I don't know. I can't seem to find the other Star Sapphire, so I don't think our problems are sorted. But they kind of put that aside. They're just like, let's not worry about that now. We just got to make sure that Carol is safe. And we actually get a little bit of a... so Barry has the Sapphire jewel in his hand and doesn't realize that the original Star Sapphire has gone back inside the jewel. Like, all of the distress and the mental breakdown that she had caused her to retreat into the jewel where she is choosing to remain hidden. And then he's like, one more thing back there. I'm sorry I lost my grip. I miss Iris so much, but she'd be glad to know I had somebody around to set me straight when I needed it. And Hal's just like, anytime. After all, pal, what are friends for? And then we get a little bit of a closing page of Thomas writing his Green Lantern journal, which was the thing that he would do back in the past. He was writing a Green Lantern journal, eventually hoping to print it and like publish it as an actual book. And he talks about the fact that like Hal and Barry, after this adventure, you know, they shook hands and the two of them went off in separate directions towards their own skies. And it's kind of symbolizing the fact that this was their last adventure together. They didn't know it, but this was their last adventure together, and from this point forward, their lives would diverge in pretty intense ways. As we know for Barry, it would eventually lead to the trial of Barry Allen after he kills Eobard Thawne, and then his death in the Crisis. Meanwhile, Hal would quit the Green Lantern Corps for a while, and would lose his ring for a while, and would have to deal with John Stewart and Guy Gardner taking over as Green Lantern, and the stuff that came with that. So yeah, that's the end of Brave and the Bold. Overall, I think this series, when it comes to recommending this series, it's really as simple as, if you like Green Lantern, like if you like Hal Jordan, and you like Barry Allen, and you like their friendship, then it's highly recommended that you read this series. But at the same time, I think there has to be a certain level of love for the original stuff too, because you're gonna get the most out of the series if you have read like the Silver Age and the Bronze Age of Green Lantern and the Flash, and if you don't care about that stuff at all, I don't know if it's worth recommending reading this. Because if you don't like that stuff, you're probably not gonna like this, because that's what this is. It's a lot of those kind of stories. But if you love hard traveling heroes, if you like those old Flash stories and those old Green Lantern stories, even if you haven't read them, if you like them, then you will definitely get a lot out of this. But if you, I will say, like, if you love the relationship between Hal and Barry, that is enough to carry this story, and you can read it just for that. You just might not get as much enjoyment out of it as somebody who was already like into those old comics, or has read them, or has always been interested in them. And maybe give this a try, read it, and who knows, if you like it, maybe you'll go back and read that old stuff. Like, I think that's another thing about the series that I like, is that it might get more people, the more people that read this, the more people might go back and read those old Silver Age stories, those old Bronze Age stories, hard traveling heroes, and things like that. Because I think this book does a very good job of selling those eras and trying to get people to read that stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if there were people that went back and read that stuff before they read this, because they wanted to get more out of it. They wanted to understand all the references. But yeah, that's going to be it for this episode of Flash Forward. I was really happy to be able to talk about to talk about this miniseries, especially since I'd originally forgotten to cover it. So I'm glad I remembered and was able to read and talk about it because I really enjoyed it. I love the Flash. I love Green Lantern. I love Hal. I love Barry, and I love their friendship. So I was very happy to be able to read and talk about this miniseries. And next week, I'm going to be beginning the next major DC event, Joker's Last Laugh, which is a massive crossover event all about the Joker taking over the DC universe. So we'll see how that plays out when we cover that next week. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and yeah, hope to see you next week for Joker's Last Laugh. Have a good one.